Konnichiwa. Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Gabe Morales. I'm going to switch gears for just a minute. I had meant to do this show right after the Triad Tong series, but got sidetracked. Very recently, I was asked again about them, so thought I'd give a quick update on the Yakuza. As you probably already know by now, whether you love or hate the show, I often relay a little history of an area and my personal background dealing with many of the subjects covered on the show before I get into specific details. And so that is the case again here. The period from the 1880s through early 1900s brought a wave of Japanese immigration to the Seattle area. One catalyst for this immigration was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which, along with the spat of anti-Chinese violence, including the Seattle riot of 1886, which I covered in my Tongs Part 3 video, led to the departure of nearly all Chinese from the Seattle area. The departure of Chinese laborers opened the door for Japanese immigrants to fill the labor void in the area. I grew up with many Japanese Americans in the very diverse city of Seattle during the 1960s and 70s, and knew many more after that time period. All who I can remember were very respectful, quiet, clean, and hardworking. I spent the last year in the Corps being stationed in Okinawa and learned some Japanese due to some places not speaking English. I soon became very familiar with local culture and got to be very good with eating with chopsticks because some places didn't even carry forks. I also found out that Okinawa is like Hawaii for the Japanese. Many vacationed there. Speaking of Hawaii, where I currently reside, the Japanese were a very big part of its history. I am not speaking of the Pearl Harbor incident, which is the first thing that many people think of. I mean, just like Seattle, some of the earliest settlers were of Japanese descent, even going back to a time when the islands were an independent nation known as the Kingdom of Hawaii. Hawaiian royal family and Japanese royalty would often communicate. February 8, 1885, about 900 Japanese immigrants suddenly arrived in Hawaii. Japanese would quickly become one of the island's largest ethnic groups. And today, approximately 15% of Hawaii's population has Japanese ancestry. Japanese visitors and tourism were huge in Hawaii until the recent pandemic cut that way down. The vast majority of Japanese residents and tourists are law-abiding, but there are some who are not, and we'll now get into that small percentage who have had a very large impact on crime in Japan, impacts on the United States, and even worldwide. To understand the modern-day Yakuza, we must first examine Japanese society during the days of the samurai. Many people know Japan lost World War II, maybe even know that an emperor, like the Chinese emperor, was the supreme leader, and even considered to be God on earth by some. They may have seen American movies or heard about the samurai, but don't completely understand how powerful their influence really was. Samurai, or bushi, were members of the warrior class in Japan. Originally, they were provincial warriors, served the imperial court in the late 12th century, and eventually they played a major political role until their abolition, late 1870s, during the Meiji Dynasty era. Previously, the shogun, meaning supreme general, was the military dictator of Japan during the feudal period. Unlike the emperor, who held a mostly symbolic role, the shoguns exercised real political power. They were the de facto rulers of Japan. Their origins are disputed by many, but most modern Yakuza are said to have derived from two main social classifications, which emerged during the mid-Edo period of 1603 through 1868. Tekiya, those primarily involved in peddling stolen goods, and bakuru, those who were involved in or participated in illegal gambling. Shimizu Hirocho is probably Japan's most famous Yakuza boss. He was born Shogoro Yamamoto, but changed his name when he was adopted. Due to the fall of his adopted family, he became a bakuru, or gambler, and thereafter became the biggest Yakuza boss in his region. His life and exploits were featured in 16 different films between 1911 and 1940. Yakuza have secret rituals, go way back to the origins of the samurai, and they're also known to ornate their bodies with very colorful tattoos. In fact, according to Asian gang expert and Professor Na Wen Sandoval from Colorado, one way you can tell a Yakuza is by their smell. They often have foul body odor because most of their skin pores are covered by tattoos, which interferes with normal sweat gland functions. Pores of full body tattoos become an infection, thus they stink. It's also probably pretty hard on your kidneys and liver. For the formation of the Yakuza, they adopted the traditional Japanese hierarchical structure of an Oyabun, where Kobun, literally foster children, owe their allegiance to the parent. In much later period, the code of Jinji was developed where showing respect is a way of life, and this relationship is formalized by ceremonial sharing of sake from a single cup. Yamaguchi was a Japanese far-right and ultra-nationalist politician who founded secret societies called Jinyosha, Black Ocean Society, and Kokuruyukai, or Black Dragon Society. These organizations attracted disenfranchised ex-samurai, warriors, and also figures involved in organized crime, and they assisted in campaigns of violence and even assassinations against modern left-wing politicians. 1889, Toyama and his organizations were even implicated in the attempted assassination of a foreign minister. Though Toyama remained a private citizen all of his life, he was known as the Shadow Shogun and the boss of bosses behind the scenes because of his tremendous covert influence on nationalist politics and on the Yakuza crime syndicates. Yoshio Kodama was also a Japanese right-wing ultranationalist. He also served in the Imperial Japanese Navy as a rear admiral and was a prominent figure in the rise of organized crime in Japan. And he was a protege of Toyama Mitsuru. He also became famous behind-the-scenes power broker and was very active in Japan's political arena and the criminal underworld from the 1930s through 1970s, and became very wealthy due to his involvement in illegal smuggling operations. But in the early 1970s, it came to light that Kodama had played a role in a Lockheed Corporation bribery scandal, which effectively ended his career as a fixer and rich businessman. He was no longer considered to be a national hero, but a traitor. June 1977, charges were brought against Kodama for tax evasion related to the scandal, but the trial was never completed before he died in his sleep of a stroke in Tokyo in 1984. The Yakuza, also known as Gokuro, or the Extreme Path, are members of transnational organized crime syndicates originating in Japan. Japanese police agencies and media refer to the Yakuza gangsters as Boryokudan, while the Yakuza call themselves Ninkyo Dantai. According to investigative journalist Jake Alderstein, who wrote The Last Yakuza, 30% of Yakuza are Koreans. The Yakuza are part of the folklore of Japan, not just in hundreds of stories, or in movies, TV shows, or books, or even magazines that feature them like rock stars. They even have video games named after them. They truly are concerned about their public image of appearing as heroes for the people, as humanitarians. Thus, they avoid any crimes that might give them real bad publicity, such as attacking journalists, killing judges, or cops. They will use violence, but usually as a last resort. They are very good at intimidating people, saying, "We don't want to hurt you or your family, but," and make them think about it for a while until they agree. Watanabe-san, who is the fifth generation leader of the Yamaguchi Gumi, once said, when asked, "What do you think about what the police call you?" Boryokudan, which, as I stated earlier, literally means violent groups. And he responded, "Violence is our business. If we didn't have the violence, we'd just be a Kiwanis Club." They also have the philosophy, if you do the crime, then you do your time. There is little incentive in Japan for being an informant to criminal justice officials. But, on the other hand, their organizations will have access to their statements via public information and via their lawyers. So, the informant or their family might face serious consequences. At their height, the Yakuza maintained a large presence in the Japanese media and have been shown in American films as well, such as Black Rain, starring Michael Douglas and Andy Garcia. They controlled all kinds of vices, such as prostitution, via geishas. Today, their control of prostitution is very discreet, even though it is believed they control over 100,000 brothels in Japan alone. In 1963, the number of Yakuza members and quasi-members reached a peak of approximately 185,000. However, this number has drastically dropped every year since. Nonetheless, they still have a large presence in many Japanese business companies and operate internationally. In Japan, the Yakuza have been regarded as semi-legitimate organizations and are often seen in public and in parades. For example, immediately after the 2011 Kobe earthquake, Yamaguchi Gumi, whose headquarters are in the city, mobilized itself to provide disaster relief services, including the use of a helicopter, faster than the governor's office did. At their height, the Yakuza maintained a large presence in the Japanese media. Stated previously, the Yakuza were ultra-nationalists and supported conservative right-wing causes. At a time when Russia and China had turned left-wing communists, the Yakuza formed an alliance with politicians in post-World War II were considered to be an asset against foreign interference by communist governments. Even the U.S. government knew about their criminal escapades, but also knew about their very strong anti-communist activities during the 1950s Red Scare era. So many U.S. officials looked the other way. American occupation post-World War II was a real boom for the Yakuza, who made hundreds of millions of dollars in legal and illegal operations, including methamphetamine sales, and their membership ranks boomed. Yakuza also dressed less like samurais and dressed more like gangsters, like the La Costa Nostra did, or Sicilian Mafia in the United States. By 1968, Japan had the third biggest economy in the world, and the Yakuza had strong relations with regular businessmen and even often had good relations with police, who were also usually very conservative. They had mutual respect for each other until a scandal broke out in 1983, showing that many police officers took bribes from the Yakuza in order to go easy on them. Yamaguchi Gumi Kodai actually hired a private detective agency to get information on the police and said, "Get us phone numbers of cops that are investigating us." Once they had those phone numbers, they used them to track down where cops lived. And then they started taking photos of their families and collecting information on the police. The head of the National Police at the time, Ando Takaharu, said, "We're not going to put up with this." So in September 2009, at a press conference, he declared war on them. The Yakuza have always made a lot of their money from extortion. 2009, when the police declared war, the Japanese government made it a crime to pay off the Yakuza. So if you did business with them, associated with them, provided them money, or hired them for services, you would also be a criminal. So a lot of their money dried up because people didn't want to pay protection money because it was too risky. And in spite of real fears that still exist that the Yakuza might do something to them and their businesses, most people have chosen not to pay them off like they did in the past. Although Yakuza membership declined following the 1992 anti-gang law aimed specifically at them and passed by the Japanese government, there are still tens of thousands of Yakuza members active in Japan today and still have influence on Japanese politics and push for things like trying to convince Russians to give back the northern Kuril Islands or protest against Chinese communist intrusions. They are very pro-nationalist about Japanese affairs. The Yakuza in more recent years have worked with several major criminal groups, such as the Russian Mafia, shipping stolen cars from the land of the rising sun to former Soviet Union areas where Russian-made cars are considered to be inferior. They also have worked with the Cosa Nostra, or Italian Mafia, of the U.S. in the past. The Yamaguchi Gumi is the biggest family, accounting for over 50% of all Yakuza in Japan, and at one time had more than 55,000 members, divided into some 850 different clans. Kazuo Kaoka was the third Gumicho, or leader of the Yamaguchi Gumi from 1946 to 1981. He suffered an assassination attempt in 1978, and it was found that his attacker was from the rival Matsuda Gumi clan. The would-be assassin was found murdered soon after, and a bloody gang war broke out. Naoka died of a heart attack in 1981, and after his death, the Yamaguchi Gumi splintered even further. Nevertheless, leaders of all the Yakuza clans showed up at his funeral to pay their respects. Shinobu Tsukasa, also known as Kenichi Tsunada, is the Yamaguchi Gumi's current Oyabun, or overall boss. In 2015, thousands of former Yamaguchi Gumi officially performed a new gang after they're expelled for disloyalty towards him. Japanese media said the new group would be led by Kunio Inoue, who was the head of the Yamaguchi Gumi, a gang with some 3,000 members based in Kobe, Japan. This was a very bold and rare move of defiance, as the Yamaguchi controls so much in Japan. It became successful to the point where it has become synonymous with Japanese organized crime in many parts of Asia and other parts of the world, and it is cited frequently in gangster films about Japanese crime bosses. The Sumikoshi Kai was considered to be the second largest Yakuza clan that once had approximately 20,000 members divided into 277 clans, but they now are estimated to have under 5,000 members. The Sumiyoshi Kai has no Oyabun or leader, but is still believed to have brought in almost $300 million a year. The Inagawa Kai is considered to be the third largest Yakuza family and once had an estimated 15,000 members divided into 313 clans. However, just like the rest of these groups, they have dwindled down drastically to only approximately 3,500 members. This family is based in the Tokyo Yokohama area and was one of the first Yakuza families to expand its operations outside of Japan. Inagawa Kai was founded in 1849 as the Inagawa Gumi by Kakuji Inagawa, who was regarded as an elder statesman of the Yakuza and a peacemaker, very skilled in settling disputes between rival clans. Susumu Ishii was the second Kaicho, or godfather, of the Inagawa Kai in Japan. After World War II, he became a Yakuza and joined the organization in 1958, and rose to the number 2 position in that gang, but was imprisoned for a gambling scam from 1978 to 1984. He was then released from prison at the start of Japan's booming economy in 1984. Through various loans, bank deals, and real estate scams, he accumulated assets of over $4 billion, which he invested in projects around the world. His group even hired Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's brother, as an advisor, although the Bush family denied knowing of his criminal background. Most Inagawa Kai were drawn from the Bakuro way of life, and illegal gambling has long been the clan's main source of income. And there are several other smaller Yakuza factions. While in the past it was common for young Yakuza to cut off their little pinky, this was done to show remorse for offending a Yakuza leader, or Oyabun. It symboled a weak hand, as one could not hold a samurai sword to rise up against superiors. Today it is often avoided, as police officials at international airports often look for it. Yakuza usually still will have their hair cut short or bald. They often wear business suits and frequently adorn themselves in expensive jewelry and watches. Yakuza activity in the United States is mostly regulated to Hawaii, where, like I stated, many Japanese love to vacation. Yakuza activities in Hawaii date back to post-World War II and grew there during the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s, but they are seldom heard of anymore. There are still a few here, but just very low key. But they have also made their presence known in other parts of the country, specifically Los Angeles and the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as Seattle, Las Vegas, Arizona, Virginia, Florida, Chicago, and New York City. In California, the Yakuza have made alliances with local Vietnamese and Korean gangs, as well as Chinese triads. In 2001, the FBI's representative in Tokyo arranged for Taramasa Goto, who is considered to be the John Gotti of Japan and head of the Goto Gumi, to receive a liver transplant at the UCLA Medical Center in the United States in return for information, although it is believed he gave up very little, about the main Yamaguchi Gumi Yakuza faction in operations in the United States. The journalist who uncovered the deal received threats by Goto and was given police protection in the U.S. and in Japan. Former baseball player Ken Mizuno, for many the face of Yakuza on the U.S. West Coast until about 1990, gained a reputation for his ties to the Japanese syndicates. Mizuno first surfaced in Las Vegas in 1982 when he tried to obtain a liquor license for a Japanese restaurant at the Tropicana Hotel and Casino. He and his associates also purchased Hawaii's Olamana Golf Links course in Oahu, investing some $200 million into the resort. He is also believed to have been involved in purchases at Pebble Beach via mob associate Minoru Usitani, but it is believed that Usitani lost $350 million on the deal. But Yakuza have been known to have made many other more successful deals in the U.S. They have also had influence on the city of Seattle, although according to one former Seattle police intel sergeant, there were no Japanese American street gangs in the International District. I know for a fact there were some Yakuza and have even seen Seattle Police Department training tapes on it.
This Asian gang member, who is disguised for his own protection, describes his gang activity in the International District and other parts of Seattle.
When you say Asian gangs, do you remember some of the names of some of those gangs?
Yes, I do. The Filipino gangs were the ones who were taking over the discotheque clubs at the time, which were the Ungoys and the Tulasans, and then they had this other group called the Kulugus.
Okay. And those are Filipino gangs?
Yes, those are Filipino gangs.
Was there Japanese gangs? Chinese
Yes,
gangs?
there was a Japanese gang, and they pretty much kept quiet until they were pushed to the point.
In the year 2022, U.S. authorities announced the arrest of Takeshi Ebisawa and multiple associates. The Drug Enforcement Agency and Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms of the DOJ stated that since at least 2019, they have been investigating Ebisawa, who is considered to be a worldwide leader of the Yakuza, in connection with large narcotics and weapons trafficking. He was also accused of attempting to traffic weapons-grade materials from Burma to other countries, like Iran, according to a newly announced and superseding indictment in 2024. The Tampa Bay Lightning have been one of the most successful teams in the National Hockey League, but it recently was discovered that an investor company, Kokushai Green, a Japanese company that supposedly relied on golf courses and resorts for income, had bought into the team. The team's majority and silent owner, Takashi Okubo, who owned the outfit, is said to have never seen the state of Florida or even attended a hockey game in any area to watch his team play. As you probably figured out, this was not the crazy investment by a crazy man. The Yakuza have a long history of using legitimate businesses to launder money earned via extortion, drug trafficking, prostitution, and other illegal rackets. Today, many of the old school Yakuza do not like the disrespect many of the younger generation have shown for their superiors and for the ancient traditions and customs of these organizations. Many younger ones have flipped on their bosses in recent years, something that would have been unthinkable. Yakuza was growing during the times of the Emperor and during the U.S. occupation, the latter 1940s through 1950s and their heyday of the 1960s. Like I said, the Yakuza have been greatly diminished since their heyday of the 1960s, but are still around. I would say today that the Yakuza as a whole have gone way down to about the number 4 or 5 criminal syndicate in the world, maybe even lower among the top 10 international groups. In 2010, there were about 85,000 Yakuza left. Today, in the year 2024, the number is estimated to be under 25,000. You can find out more information about the Yakuza and other Asian and Pacific Islander gangs in my book, available on Amazon.com. Domo arigato gozaimasu. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this episode and continue supporting this channel as we discuss many more subjects in the criminal justice arena here in the United States and abroad. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off. Gangsters, cops, and politicians.